trying to take a picture of this thing. Only the stars.
Eyelids. That's really in there. The levator palpebrae is a muscle that you can only see on this model with these muscles all around the eye. And if we look at this from the side, muscles are always this kind of reddish brownish color on models. That'll be true for the rest of the semester. There's this muscle right here, and then there's a second one right on top of it. So there's two muscles on the top surface of the eye. The topmost one is the levator palpebrae superioris muscle. And that elevates your eyelids, because another word for eyelid is palpebra. So it's not the bottom one, but it's the one right above it. Eyelashes, that one's pretty self-explanatory too. I need to go into that. For the lacrimal apparatus, that is all of the things that are included that are indented beneath that. It has to do with producing tears and draining tears from your eye. If you look at this from head on, we can take this piece off so we can see it a little bit better. So we start with the lacrimal gland. That's this bump. It's on the lateral side of the eye. You can also see this on this model, this bump on the lateral surface. And this is a good landmark that tells you this is the lateral side of the eye. So that's the lacrimal gland. The lacrimal punctum, that's tough to point to. You can sort of see it right here. It's a little hole right there. But it's very close to other things, so I'm not going to point to it. I'll ask it in words. The hole leading to the lacrimal canaliculi, which we'll get to, or the lacrimal canals. And those are these two things that look like a little wishbone. They're these little pink things.
It's kind of dark.
It's better? Yeah. Okay. Can't see the words anymore, but that's okay. So that's the canal. That's the inferior one, and then there's the superior one up there. The lacrimal sac. I can't get it up on the projector because the model is too big for that. But if you look at this one and you look right on the right along the nasal bone right there, there's a pink blob. That's the lacrimal sac. So it's pretty big. Skip the nasal caruncle for a second, and we'll do the nasolacrimal duct. If you just go down from the lacrimal sac, there's a tube that goes down into your nose. That's the nasolacrimal duct. This is why when you cry, you have to blow your nose a lot, because the tears go through the lacrimal canals into the lacrimal sac, down through the nasolacrimal duct, and out through your nose. And then for the caruncle, we can go back to here, and it's that pink triangle. So you can see this when you look at somebody's eye. It's that little pink thing right in the corner, the inner corner. The corners where the eyelids come together are the canthuses. So you have a lateral canthus, which is that little corner right there.
And the medial.
And the medial canthus which is the inner corner. So it's right around that caruncle. The canthus is the corner of the eye lid, so where the eyelids come together. So lateral canthus is the outer corner, medial canthus is the inner corner. The conjunctiva, that would be a question. This is a thin layer of epithelium. That covers what we call the sclera. And the sclera is the white part of the eye. So if you've ever heard of conjunctivitis or pink eye, or see anybody that has that or had it yourself, anywhere that turns pink is the conjunctiva. For the extrinsic eye muscles, two things to keep in mind when we're looking at muscles in general. There's rectus muscles that run straight and oblique muscles that go diagonally. So rectus is straight and an oblique muscle goes diagonally. So we can see those on here. I'm going to take this part off so we can see them a little better. Okay, so we already did this muscle up here. The top one, remember, that's the levator palpebrae. The one right underneath it is the superior rectus. So the levator palpebrae is right on top of the superior rectus, and that runs straight on the top of the eye. The inferior rectus does the same thing on the bottom. So it's directly opposite the superior rectus. Lateral rectus runs straight along the outside. And then the medial rectus, you have to look behind this. This is the optic nerve, but right behind it, running along the inside corner of the eye, is the medial rectus. For the superior oblique, remember obliques run diagonally, so let's take off the levator palpebrae and the superior rectus, and just medial to them is a muscle that's running diagonally along the top. That's the superior oblique. The tendon for this is white. The tendons are always going to be white or gray, depending on what model you're looking at. But if you see this tendon, it goes forward, and then it runs through this little hook, and it comes back to insert on the eye. That little hook is the trochlea, and you can only see the trochlea on this model. So it's this little hook that the tendon of the superior oblique runs through. So there's the superior oblique, there's the trochlea. And then the inferior oblique is this one running up kind of sideways along the bottom. Now we can see most of these on pretty much any of the eye models. So if we look at this one, say, remember, we know that this is the lateral side because of the lacrimal gland. So that has to be the, which one? It's running straight on the lateral side, so it's the lateral rectus. This one up here would be the superior. Then the other side, medial rectus, and then the inferior rectus. On this side, on the lateral side, you can see the inferior oblique coming up from the bottom. You can't see the superior oblique, you just see the tendon for it right there, but I won't point to the tendon. But that's another way of knowing that's the medial side as opposed to the lateral side. That's actually the only way you can tell the medial side from the lateral side on something like this because it doesn't have the lacrimal gland on it. So you have to find that tendon for the superior oblique and go, okay, that's the medial side. So this on this side has to be the medial rectus. The other side would be the lateral rectus. You can really see the inferior oblique really well in this one. And then the superior rectus at the top. So if you don't have the lacrimal gland, you got to use the tendon for the superior oblique as the landmark to tell you it's the medial side. Okay, now for the structure of the eyeball, there's 3 wall layers, and we're going to move from outside and go in. Hey guys, can we keep it down a little? When we move from the outside in, the part that you can touch, moving deeper and deeper into the eye, the outer edge is the fibrous tunic. Then the middle layer is the vascular tunic. And the inside layer is the neural tunic, or you can call it the retina. So that's the deepest layer. So the fibrous tunic is the stuff on the outside that you can touch. The white part is the sclera. So all this is sclera. And the cornea is the clear dome in front of the iris, or the colored part of the eye. So if you look at it from the side, if you look at a person from the side, you can see that little clear dome over their eye. That's the cornea. Now for this one, they have cut out a section of the sclera so you can see the choroid or the vascular tunic right here. Choroid is just referring to most of the vascular tunic where you have blood vessels and things. So if I pointed here, you could tell me either vascular tunic or choroid. Either one is fine. For the ciliary bodies and the ciliary muscles, we don't have a model that is specific enough to differentiate between those two. So when I point to them, you can tell me either one. The ciliary muscles are inside the ciliary bodies. You can see them on this model when you open it up. There's a ciliary muscle right there. So it's towards the front and it's a little muscle. This model also has the ciliary muscles. If you take this top part off, and look at it from inside, it's the red right there. So if I point here, you can say ciliary body or ciliary muscle. Either one is fine. So these are the only 2 models you can see them on. So here or there. For the suspensory ligaments, this model, somebody painted over the suspensory ligaments, so you can't see them on this one. You can see them on all the others. They're going to be towards the front, and they're all these little whitish stripes. So on any of the models, you can open them up and see these whitish stripes inside. Now, one thing to think about is the way that the muscles are, or these models are kind of arranged. With this one, you've got the sclera and then the choroid on the outside, or the vascular tunic. So it's kind of incorporated into this outer piece. With a lot of the other models, you've got the sclera here, and then you take it apart and you have this eyeball right here, and what you're looking at, this brown, that's the vascular tunic or the choroid. Others will look exactly the same. This little one is just like that. You take off the sclera, there's the choroid inside. So most of them are going to be arranged like that. This one, oops. I just broke his retina. Oh no. Thank you. Oh. Okay. That didn't happen. We didn't do that. Okay, so oops. For this one, if you take off the sclera, try not to drop the retina like I did. There's the choroid inside. It's painted this bright yellow. So the choroid is going to be in this one, this like neon yellow or orange or whatever. For the rest of them, it'll be brown or purple. The ora serrata, that is towards the front also. It's this line here that goes around the front of the eye, so between the brown and the pink. Sorry, what is there? The ora serrata. So we have the suspensory ligaments, and then just a little farther back from them is the ora serrata. On here, it's this black line. On the other model, on this one, it'll be this red line. So it's always this line that wraps around the front. So it just goes in a whole circle around the front. Let's skip the lens for a second. Let's do the iris and the pupil first. The iris is the colored part of the eye, and the pupil is the hole inside of that. Bless you. And then the lens is this piece, it's glass here, or plastic or whatever, behind the pupil. This is probably the only model you'd be able to see it on. It's the only one where it's fixed. The others, it's the only one I would ask it on too. The other models, they come out, so they're kind of all over the place. And they've been broken over the years. Not all by me. Okay, then the neural tunic, that's the deepest layer, so we can see it as the inside here. Or there, you can see little neurons painted on here. For this one, it's the little glass ball that I threw. That's this one. That's the retina or the neural tunic. And for this one, for most of them, it's just painted on the inside here. So it's going to be kind of like an orange color for the most part, or a peach. This comes from the eye with all the muscles. You've got the choroid out here. You open it up, and there's the retina inside of here. There's the suspensory ligaments and the ora serrata. Now in the neural tunic, you've got the photoreceptors that sense light, and they're called rods and cones. So that would be asked as a question. So they are the photoreceptors. Does anybody know the difference between a rod and a cone?
Isn't it like how you perceive the light or something like that?
In terms of color, yes. So does anybody remember which one's color? Cones. So they both have the word C in them. So cones are for color, rods are for black and white. The macula lutea is a place on the retina towards the back where you have a lot of cones. On this little eye, you can see it as this yellow circle here. It's not very big at all, this little yellow circle. This one. On this one, it's this really light lavender circle. It's just always going to be very small and towards the back, and it's going to be either yellow or kind of pinkish purple. The fovea is the center of that. On the practical, if I just point here, you can tell me macula lutea or fovea. I can't make the arrow precise enough to get to the difference of that. But if I say as a question, maybe, what is the center of the macula lutea? Then you would say fovea centralis. And then the last part of the neural tunic is the optic disc. This is where the axons for the optic nerve leave the eye. So it's right here, this white circle. So it's right next to the macula. Here it's this white and yellow circle. You can see the little optic nerve coming out that way. Okay, for the cavities and humors, these will be, for the most part, asked as questions. So the anterior cavity is the space between the cornea and the lens. And we can divide that into two smaller spaces. They're called chambers. There's one in the front, which is the anterior chamber. That's the space between the cornea and the iris. And then the posterior chamber is the space between the iris and the lens. So to look at it, and I'm not going to point it to you, I'm going to use it as questions. But here's your cornea, here's the iris, here's the lens. So this whole space in here is the anterior cavity. We can divide it into the anterior chamber, which is just between the cornea and the iris, and then the posterior chamber, which is just between the iris and the lens. The whole thing is filled with a watery fluid called aqueous humor. So aqueous humor is the fluid in the anterior cavity. So in both of those chambers, the scleral venous sinus. Those are sometimes painted over. Not very easy to see. I'm going to actually make them a little better for a minute. But there would be two little blue dots right here in the very front, and they're only on this model, and then somehow they got painted over. But that's where they are. These two little blue dots in the very front. They are how aqueous humor circulates through the eye, so how it gets out of the anterior cavity. And then the posterior chamber, or the posterior cavity, sorry. This is everything that's behind the lens. So it's a space behind the lens, and it's filled with vitreous humor, or the vitreous body, whichever one you want to call it. And that's a thicker fluid in the posterior cavity. And that's what makes your eyeball feel like an eyeball. Okay, now for the visual pathway, you need to know those steps in order. You already know the parts to it, with the exception of one of them. So I'll show you now. So you just need to know those steps in order. So I might ask you, a visual impulse goes from the optic nerve to the blank, and then you would say the optic chiasm. So I could ask you at any part of that pathway what the next step is, or what the previous step is. The one thing that you haven't learned that I could point to is the optic tract. And it's really easy. You just find the optic nerve, and then the lateral geniculate nucleus. It's a strip of white between the two. So on the seahorse analogy, it's like he's wearing his reins, kind of, or a bridle.
What was that called again?
The optic tract.
Thank you.
Could you go over the pathways? Could you go over the pathways?
Yeah, sure. It's the optic nerve, and then the optic chiasm is where they cross. Then the optic tract is right here. The lateral geniculate nucleus. Optic radiation, that's just a verb describing the fact that there are axons that lead from the lateral geniculate nucleus out to the visual cortex, which is in the back of your occipital lobe. Okay, any questions about the eye? Does anybody need to see anything on the eye again? Yes, of course.
Can you show the difference between the choroid and the retina?
The choroid is, so on, where's this model? Here's the choroid. The retina's inside. It's going to be pretty much the same for most of them. You'll have the choroid out here, the retina painted inside, with the exception of this model, where the choroid is painted inside, and then the retina is the glass ball inside. Yeah, Daniel?
You said on one of the models, like the lacrimal gland isn't on it, so the way you tell that it's medial is through.
The tendon for the superior oblique.
Do you see that tendon?
Uh-huh, yep, uh-huh, yep, that's how you use it. Okay, now for the ear. The first couple words will be used on this big ear, which is going to be hard to put up here. But the words are pretty easy, so I'll just hold them up here. The auricle is just this outside part of your ear, so like the top part of your ear. And the lobule is your earlobe, so at the bottom. The auditory canal, if you look from the outside, there's your external auditory meatus, or there's the hole leading into your head. That's the auditory canal. And it's lined with glands that make earwax, and those are called the ceruminous glands. Bless you. So the ceruminous glands line the auditory canal, and they make earwax.
Would that be a question?
Yes, that would be a question only. For the middle ear, that's this stuff right here in the middle. We start out with the tympanic membrane, which if you take this out, it's this little piece of plastic here, the eardrum Skip down to the auditory ossicles for a second. I'm going to show you where they are. I'm not going to ask them on this test because we did those for the previous test. But here they are. Well, here's two of them anyway. There's the incus and there's the malleus. The stapes, on the other hand, is when we get into the snail shell looking thing, at least on the models. And you can see the stapes here, kind of broke off, but there's the stapes.
So we don't even.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask the ossicles on there. But I am going to use the stapes to help you understand the oval window, which is right under the stapes. It fits right under the foot of the stapes, so you can't see it here because there's the stapes on top of it. But if we take this bigger thing that looks like a snail, it's the same piece but bigger, so it's easier to see. There's the oval window. So it's this oval piece on the head of the snail. It's this number D.
No,
Letter D.
that's B. Because B on the side.
On a roll today.
What?
Okay, the round window, that's this right here.
Got it in the first one.
Can I read that letter? I can't, it's too small for me.
I felt more confident.
Why? Oh, Lord. A. It look like an A. A lowercase A.
I can't tell what that is.
Lowercase
Yeah, well, it's the round one, so whatever letter that is.
They're cute.
So round window's round, oval window's oval. Those are pretty easy.
Sits on.
And then the eustachian tube or the auditory tube, that's back to the big model. It's a big ear. And it's behind the eardrum. It's this tube right here, and it leads down to your, basically to behind your face. There's a tube behind your face called the pharynx, and this leads down to it. So it's right behind the tympanic membrane. Okay, so let's skip over the layers and fluids for just a minute. I'll get to it where I can show you. So we need to learn a couple more parts first. We'll go back to the snail. The vestibule is the head of the snail. So you see the little snail shell, and then everything that's like the head and the body of the snail, that would be the vestibule. And if you flip the vestibule around and look at it from behind, you can see two bumps. The top bump is the utricle. There's a big capital B on it. You can see that. And then the saccule is the lower bump. It's that lowercase g. The macula, or maculae for plural, these are sensory receptors in the utricle and the saccule. Oops. So, the vestibule. And if we look at our snail again, he has these three circles on his head. Those are the semicircular canals. So all three are the semicircular canals. At the base, they get kind of wider. That's the ampulla. So all of them at the base get kind of wider down here. And inside of there are other sensory receptors called the cristae, or the cristae ampullaris. I'll just put the full name there, but you can just call it the cristae. But these are sensory receptors in the ampulla the semicircular canals. Okay, so when we get into here, into the cochlea part of the snail, this is the shell. So this is the cochlea. And if we open this up, you can look inside and see these kind of repeating sections of 3 little tubes, basically. And we're going to actually use this bigger model to look at this. Easier to see on here. Okay, so this bigger model is just this little one blown up really big.
Oh,
So it's just a very big one of these. So it's easier to point to stuff on here. The vestibular membrane is this kind of diagonal wiggly membrane right here. So you can move it a little bit. The basilar membrane is this one under the pink blob. Now you're gonna notice there are some books that have things that say the vestibular duct, the cochlear duct, and the tympanic duct. Other books, instead of saying vestibular duct, they'll say scala vestibuli. Cochlear duct just stays the same. And then the tympanic duct, they'll call the scala tympani. You can use whichever set of terminology you want to, or both. It doesn't matter to me. You can call it the scala vestibuli or the vestibular duct. Both are correct. Anyway, where the scala vestibuli or the vestibular duct is this one right above the vestibular membrane. So it's this big area right here. The cochlear duct is the triangular piece. And then inside of that, you'll find the spiral organ, which is the pink blob that sits right on top of the basilar membrane. And that has hair cells on it, and there are these actual little bristles. And right above them is the tectorial membrane, which is this little piece sticking out on top of the spiral organ. And then at the bottom here, down here, which you can't see on here, that's the tympanic duct at the bottom. So vestibular duct, vestibular membrane, cochlear duct, basilar membrane, tympanic duct down here.
Yeah. Are you going to ask this question then on a big one like that?
Yes, I would use this one. On the other one, it's just way too tiny. It's too hard to point to. Now, I want to go back now to the layers and the fluids for a minute. Because now that we saw those, they'll make more sense. So we have what we call the osseous labyrinth. And this is the bony part of the vestibule and the cochlea. And it's filled with a fluid called perilymph. Then we have the membranous labyrinth. And this is membranes that line the osseous labyrinth inside. And that is filled with endolymph. So if we look at it on the scale itself, we can see the bony labyrinth versus the membranous labyrinth in the vestibule. So the bony labyrinth is all the white on the outside. And then the membrane, the membranous labyrinth, would be that gray. And then the perilymph, that would be this pink stuff right here. So it goes bony labyrinth, perilymph, membranous labyrinth. Inside the membranous labyrinth would be endolymph, but we can't see that inside of here. So the perilymph just separates the bony labyrinth from the membranous labyrinth. If we were to look in the cochlea, the membranous labyrinth is the vestibular membrane and the basilar membrane right here. So outside of that, in the tympanic duct and the vestibular duct, you have perilymph, and inside you have endolymph. So let me write that down. So perilymph is inside the vestibular and tympanic ducts, and endolymph is inside the cochlear duct. So that could be asked as a question. What is the fluid that fills the membranous labyrinth? Or what is the fluid that is inside the cochlear duct for endolymph? Or what is the fluid inside either the vestibular duct or the tympanic ducts? Or where would you find perilymph? You could say inside the vestibular or the tympanic duct. Okay, for the vestibulocochlear nerve, we've seen it where it comes off the brain, but now we can see it at the ear. So it has two branches. Remember, here's the cochlea, so you can see the kind of the back side of the cochlea right here. So the snail shell, the head is the vestibule. So the vestibular nerve is this branch of the vestibulocochlear nerve that goes up towards the vestibule. So it's this top one going towards the snail head. And the cochlear nerve is coming right off of the back of the cochlea. And on this little one, everything's smaller. Here. So this whole thing would be the vestibulocochlear nerve, and then once it splits, there's the vestibular nerve. That would be the cochlear nerve. Much easier to see on here, though. Vestibular, cochlear. And then for the auditory pathway, same idea as with the visual pathway, know the steps in order. So starting with the cochlear nerve, then it goes to the cochlear nucleus. You don't need to be able to point that out. We don't have a model for that. Just know that that's the second step. Then the inferior colliculus, that is on the seahorse. We know where that is. That's this bump right here. The medial geniculate nucleus, that's this one right here, so we already know that one. And then the auditory cortex out in the temporal lobe. So just know those in order. They would be asked as a question. Okay, so that is the eye and the ear. Does anyone have any questions or need to see something on the ear again? Okay, so our test is not next Thursday, but the one after. So you have today to get to know the eye and the ear, and next week you have time to just study and make sure that you go over whatever you need.